My beloved child, stay with me, because what you are about to hear begins with a photograph, but it does not end there. Don't look away now. In this fictional spiritual story, Archangel Michael steps forward with a message wrapped in symbolism, and the first thing he wants you to understand is that the photograph in this story represents far more than an image. It represents the version of you that someone thought they understood. It represents your identity, your confidence, your memories, and the light you carry into rooms without realizing how deeply people notice it. Someone looked at that image and believed they could influence what belonged to you simply by focusing their jealousy, resentment, and intention upon it. But there is something they misunderstood. Something huge is waiting for you, because the greatest revelation is not what they tried to do. The greatest revelation is what they could never reach. Stay till the end, because the meaning of the 2-minute ritual is about to turn completely upside down. Picture the scene as spiritual symbolism: a quiet room, a photograph resting on a table, a small flame flickering nearby, and someone staring at your face as though your future could somehow be rewritten from a distance. They thought your photograph was a doorway. They thought your silence meant weakness. They thought the moments when you questioned yourself had created an opening. They thought that because you had experienced delays, unanswered questions, and strange emotional heaviness, you would be easy to shake. But Archangel Michael enters this story not with panic, but with a truth powerful enough to change the entire meaning of what you are hearing. An image can capture your face, but it cannot capture your destiny. A photograph can preserve 1 second of your life, but it cannot own the thousands of seconds still waiting ahead of you. What comes next changes everything. The person in this symbolic story had been holding on to an old picture because they were holding on to an old version of you. They remembered who you used to be when you doubted yourself. They remembered when you gave people too many chances. They remembered when you stayed silent to keep peace, even when your heart knew something felt wrong. And because they never noticed how much you had changed internally, they believed they were dealing with the same person. They were not. This is where the story begins. Something happened inside you quietly. There was no announcement. There was no dramatic moment when everyone around you suddenly understood that you had changed. Your transformation happened in private. Every disappointment taught you something. Every closed door strengthened something. Every confusing season forced you to discover what mattered. Every time you had to rebuild your confidence, another invisible layer of strength formed inside you. The person looking at your photograph could see your eyes, your expression, your appearance, but they could not see those layers. They could not see what heaven had been building beneath the surface. And that is why the photograph becomes such an important symbol. They were concentrating on a frozen version of you while your spirit had already moved forward. Your answer is closer than you think. Archangel Michael says in this fictional message, look carefully at what is being revealed, because the mystery is not about whether another person possesses power over you. The mystery is why they believed they did. Stay with me. That question matters. Why would someone become so focused on another person that they begin measuring themselves against that person's happiness? Why would someone watch your progress and secretly feel uncomfortable when you begin rising? Why would your confidence disturb somebody who claimed not to care? That is the first emotional twist. This was never really about your photograph. It was about what your photograph reminded them of. When they looked at you, they saw something they had not found within themselves. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was resilience. Maybe it was the ability to remain kind without becoming weak. Maybe it was the strange way you kept rebuilding after moments that were supposed to make you give up. They could not understand how you kept moving. They expected certain disappointments to change you permanently, yet somehow you became wiser without becoming cold. They expected delays to make you abandon your dreams, yet something inside you kept whispering that your story was unfinished. They expected loneliness to convince you that you were forgotten, yet somewhere beneath your questions you kept protecting a tiny flame of hope. That flame is what bothered them. Don't skip, because now the symbolism of the ritual becomes clearer. The ritual represents every attempt, real or imagined, to make you doubt what you already know about yourself. The ticking 2 minutes represent urgency, but not the kind you first expected. They represent the final moments of an old belief you have been carrying, the belief that someone else's opinion, jealousy, rejection, or negativity can decide the direction of your life. That belief is what is reaching its ending. Not your protection. Not your future. Not your blessing. The fear itself is running out of time. And the one click from the title becomes symbolic too. It is not a magical button. It represents a decision. One decision to stop handing your peace to things you cannot verify. One decision to stop imagining that every delay means something is working against you. One decision to stop allowing somebody else's behavior to determine how you see yourself. One decision to remember that your life is larger than the thoughts another person may hold about you. Don't look away now, because this revelation changes the entire story. Archangel Michael stands between the photograph and the person staring at it, and suddenly the flame beside the image begins to flicker differently. The person becomes confused. They expected certainty. Instead, they feel their confidence disappearing. They look again at the photograph and notice something they had ignored before: your eyes. There is calmness there. There is something they cannot explain. And suddenly the story turns from what they were trying to accomplish into what they were secretly afraid of. They were afraid you would discover your own worth. They were afraid you would stop seeking approval. They were afraid you would finally recognize patterns you had been excusing. They were afraid you would realize that some people only felt comfortable around you when you were questioning yourself. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because Archangel Michael is about to reveal why this person chose your photograph in the first place, and the answer is connected to a moment from your past that you may have considered insignificant. There was a moment when you walked away from something emotionally without making a scene. Maybe nobody around you understood how significant that moment was. You simply became quieter. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped chasing answers that people refused to give honestly. You stopped forcing conversations. You stopped trying to convince people to see your intentions correctly. And from the outside, it looked like nothing had happened. But spiritually, symbolically, something enormous had happened. You had begun reclaiming your attention. Attention is powerful. Wherever your attention goes, your emotional energy follows. For a long time, people who confused you could keep your attention simply by remaining unpredictable. A little warmth, then distance. A promise, then silence. Support, then comparison. Kind words, then behavior that contradicted them. Your mind kept trying to solve the puzzle. But eventually you realized something: peace does not require endless decoding. And when you withdrew your attention from what constantly disturbed your peace, certain people felt the difference. That is why, in this story, someone reaches for the photograph. They no longer have the same access to your attention, so they reach for an image of the version of you they remember. What comes next changes everything. They are not powerful because they possess the picture. The picture proves the opposite. It proves that all they have is a memory while the real you is continuing forward. Stay with me. The countdown continues symbolically, 1 minute and 40 seconds. But Archangel Michael does not watch the clock with fear. He watches you. Because heaven is waiting to see whether you understand the message. You have spent too much time wondering who might secretly dislike you, who might be thinking about you, who might be comparing themselves with you, who might be speaking about you when you are absent. And Michael turns your attention away from all of them and back toward you. Your life cannot be built by constantly looking over your shoulder, the message says. You were given eyes that face forward for a reason. Your answer is closer than you think. Perhaps the greatest protection is not discovering every hidden opinion. Perhaps it is reaching a place where hidden opinions no longer control your direction. Perhaps the greatest victory is not proving somebody wrong. Perhaps it is becoming so grounded in your purpose that you no longer need to know who doubted you. That is the first once-in-a-lifetime revelation of this story. The person you thought was holding something over you was actually holding onto something behind you. An old image. An old chapter. An old version. And you are no longer there. There is another detail in the room, however, and this is the detail Archangel Michael does not want you to miss. Stay with me. Beside the photograph sits a small mirror. At first it seems meaningless, almost like background decoration, but this mirror carries the deepest symbolism in the entire scene. The person keeps looking from your photograph to their own reflection. Your picture, their reflection. Your picture, their reflection. Again and again. And suddenly the truth becomes unmistakable. This was comparison disguised as control. This was insecurity disguised as certainty. They were not truly studying you. They were measuring themselves against you. Don't look away now. What comes next changes everything. Every time they saw something good happening around you, instead of asking how they could grow, they asked why it was happening for you. Every time you became more confident, they interpreted your growth as a reminder of where they felt stuck. Every time you stopped reacting, they wondered why they could no longer affect your emotions as easily. Every time you chose peace, their own inner noise became louder. That is the emotional twist. Sometimes another person's fixation is not evidence that there is something wrong with you. It can be evidence that your existence is touching something unresolved inside them. And the mirror reveals what the photograph never could. The photograph shows your face, the mirror shows their struggle. This is where the story begins again at a deeper level. Archangel Michael moves closer to the table, and in this cinematic spiritual scene the atmosphere becomes still. The countdown shows 1 minute and 20 seconds. Yet Michael remains completely calm. Why? Because the countdown is not measuring how much time you have before something reaches you. It is measuring how little time fear has before the truth replaces it. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. The person reaches toward the photograph again, but this time their hand pauses. Something has changed. They remember a conversation. This is the moment from your past I told you would matter. It may have seemed small then. Perhaps you once encouraged this person when they were struggling. Perhaps you once defended them when others misunderstood them. Perhaps you once celebrated something good that happened to them without making it about yourself. Perhaps you gave kindness when you had nothing to gain. And now, looking at your photograph, that memory returns. Suddenly the person cannot maintain the story they created about you. They wanted to see you as competition, but their memory reminds them that you once treated them with compassion. They wanted to blame you for what they lacked, but the mirror forces them to confront the truth: you did not take their opportunities. You did not create their insecurity. You did not cause their dissatisfaction. You were simply nearby when those feelings surfaced. Your answer is closer than you think. Archangel Michael says, the truth does not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a memory nobody can argue with. That memory changes everything. The person begins remembering moments when you made yourself smaller so others could feel comfortable. Times when you changed your tone so nobody would accuse you of being too confident. Times when you downplayed achievements because you sensed that someone else was uncomfortable. Times when you apologized for taking up space you had every right to occupy. And suddenly the spiritual symbolism becomes personal. Maybe you have been doing this longer than you realized. Maybe you learned to shrink your joy because people reacted strangely when you were excited. Maybe you learned to hide your plans because you feared disappointment or judgment. Maybe you stopped speaking openly about your dreams because someone always found a reason to make them sound unrealistic. Don't skip. This is not where you are being told to become suspicious of everyone. It is where you are being invited to stop becoming suspicious of yourself. There is a difference. You do not need to analyze every person around you. You need to notice what happens inside you when you begin abandoning your own confidence to keep somebody else comfortable. That is the true ritual being cancelled in this story, the ritual of self-doubt. The repeated habit of questioning yourself. The cycle of shrinking, explaining, overthinking, and seeking permission. One click will cancel everything, not literally through supernatural force, but symbolically through one internal choice. You stop participating in the belief that you must become smaller to remain accepted. Stay with me. 1 minute remains. The person in the room expects the final minute to give them what they wanted. Instead, something unexpected happens. The mirror falls flat onto the table. Nothing dramatic. Nothing frightening. Just a simple movement. Yet when it falls, the person can no longer see themselves beside your photograph. For the first time, they are forced to look at your image without comparing it to their reflection. And without comparison, their resentment begins losing its fuel. This is spiritual symbolism at its strongest. Comparison requires 2 images. Remove one, and the competition begins disappearing. Perhaps you need to do the same in your own life. Stop placing your beginning beside somebody else's middle. Stop comparing your private struggles with somebody else's public highlights. Stop measuring your timing against people whose journey you do not fully know. Stop interpreting somebody else's success as evidence that you have been forgotten. What comes next changes everything. Archangel Michael turns the photograph face down. Again, not because the photograph possesses anything, but because its symbolic purpose is complete. Your identity cannot remain trapped in one image. You are becoming someone your past cannot fully describe. That is why certain relationships may feel different. That is why conversations that once entertained you may now exhaust you. That is why places that once felt comfortable may suddenly feel too small. Growth changes your emotional vocabulary. You begin recognizing peace where you once mistook chaos for excitement. You begin recognizing consistency where you once chased intensity. You begin recognizing respect where you once settled for attention. You begin recognizing your own intuition where you once demanded endless external reassurance. Stay till the end, because there is still one final detail in this scene that nobody noticed. Underneath the photograph is a folded piece of paper. The person never saw it because they were too focused on the image. Archangel Michael lifts the photograph, revealing the paper beneath it. Written across that symbolic page are 3 words: "You already changed." That is the revelation. They were trying to influence someone who no longer existed in the form they remembered. The old you might have spent days wondering what someone thought. The old you might have chased clarification from people committed to misunderstanding you. The old you might have mistaken silence for rejection, delays for failure, and somebody else's coldness for proof that you were not enough. But something has shifted. Maybe only slightly. Maybe you are still learning. Maybe you still have moments when old fears return. Yet you recover faster now. You notice patterns sooner. You recognize when your thoughts are carrying you somewhere that facts never asked you to go. You are learning to separate intuition from anxiety, wisdom from assumption, and discernment from endless suspicion. That matters. Don't look away now. The countdown shows 45 seconds. The person suddenly realizes that the ritual they believed would change you has instead confronted them with themselves. Their certainty cracks. Their resentment becomes embarrassment. And underneath that embarrassment is something surprisingly human: sadness. Not sadness because they failed to control you, but sadness because they finally recognize how much time they wasted comparing themselves to someone who was never competing with them. Something huge is waiting for you. The greatest twist in this fictional story is compassion. You expected Archangel Michael to reveal an enemy. Instead, he reveals a wounded person who made unhealthy choices because they had not learned how to face their own insecurity. That does not mean you must invite every person back into your life. Compassion and access are different things. Forgiveness and trust are different things. Understanding why someone behaves a certain way does not require you to place yourself back inside the same pattern. You can wish somebody healing without handing them responsibility for your peace. You can release resentment without reopening every closed door. You can understand somebody's pain without becoming the place where they repeatedly unload it. Your answer is closer than you think. This is maturity. This is the moment when protection stops meaning fear of everyone outside you and begins meaning wisdom within you. 30 seconds remain. Archangel Michael looks directly toward you through the symbolism of this narration and says, "Do not spend these final seconds looking at her. Look at what you have become. Stay with me. Remember the days you thought you would never get through. Remember the questions that once consumed you but no longer control your mornings. Remember the people whose approval once seemed necessary but whose silence no longer defines your value. Remember the closed doors you begged to reopen before realizing later why moving forward was better. Remember the version of you who could not imagine possessing the perspective you have today. You survived emotional seasons you once thought would last forever.